to this wonderful gathering in the park. It's always an honour to be here at the Aris in the company of the very best of people. And this afternoon we are most definitely with the very best of people.
Gwni cwr, an gedal sis, min la me mahan hein, agos sama van kele saivin, cyn ffolja ro filiwg o'r sy'n wgtron. Agos o gohyr na ddyn atá I gest. Mar, nu'r smwynym sir o'n ama, hwn eich meg o'r sy'n wgtron. Gals nes ag yn sosaf them. No, an gweil a bedrlam a dde le glosig na gar cuman was ilio. My brothers and sisters of the trade union movement, guess you're all welcome. And I'm so pleased that you have been able to join us this afternoon. May I just say that there are symbols of our shared movement, the trade union movement, that precede you. For example, there is the citizen army flag on the wane and the whole. But I think that very early on, I had just about begun to be president, and I gave for, I might call it Radio Erin, Radio 1, the lecture that celebrated the lockout. And very, very early on, it was very, very important, I think, to establish a part of our history that was not symbolically represented very well. And thus, you'll have noticed that we have put in a tribute to the Sean Casey and to the Citizen Army. And then, I think as well, during COVID, it was very important on the points of that star to be able to take the unions that were representing the first line workers, and each one stood at a point of the star, and we were able to express our thanks in that way. And then I think too as well, but recently we have celebrated May Day in a particular way every year. And this year we were also so pleased to be able to dedicate a tree to Tom Johnson and the Labour movement, and also to draw attention to that lost period of history when people sought for peace, both during the War of Independence, during the Civil War, and indeed with the trade union movement immediately after the foundation of the state, sought, as it faced opposition from the newly formed Farmers' Union, now newly strengthened by the agricultural labourers, there was an immediate confrontation. So many symbols precede you, but I want to say that nothing gives me greater pleasure than to see so many of the trade unions, all of you, represented here at Oras and Uchtron this afternoon. I'm so pleased to celebrate the theme. Every year when we're deciding on the garden parties, we have a set of themes. And today's theme is celebrating the trade union movement. It's a subject that comes naturally to my heart and to Sabina's. Sabina started in equity. I started in the Workers' Union of Ireland, progressed to the Federated Workers' Union of Ireland, and we are all together now in SIPTU, but so many other unions are represented here. I do want to say, we are honoured to have the President of the Irish Congress of Trade Union Movements, Justin McCampbell, with us, and I say a special welcome to him. The General Secretary of FOSSA, Kevin Callanan, the General Secretary of SIPTU, Joe Cunningham, with all of you, and whether members of the different unions, whether you've come in your numbers or in dozens, you're all welcome. For example, all of the teaching unions. It's quite different from those times I used to meet you at Easter times, and occasionally, but you are all most welcome. I think as well, I'm delighted that the Union of Students in Ireland are represented here. Today, we invite you to join us in celebration of your work, the work of the past, the work in which you're engaged, and the important work of the future. And we celebrate together the work of all those activists who have gone before you, organising and marching and fighting for workers' rights and standing in solidarity with colleagues, fellow citizens and people all over the world in struggles against injustice, inequality and exclusion in the workplace. We're meeting, I believe, at a historic moment in the role of in defining the role of trade unions. Trade unions with a long and glorious history of fighting for and providing protection for workers, I think are now in a position of entirely new circumstances. I think there is an opportunity for unions, and it is being taken by unions, to play a leadership role in defining what will be the forms of economy, ecology, social justice and society that will enable us to have a sustainable future. It is the better thinking, the better economics, the better discussion and social provision. All of this is coming from unions now. And I think, whereas before, rather than simply awaiting an invitation to the shape of the economy or responses to economic crisis, unions now are sitting down as equals with CEOs and with governments, and the expertise that they're bringing to these discussions is being acknowledged. And unions have shown that they are not just skillful and reliable partners, but with the intellectual resources and analytical capacity and experience of work itself that they have some of the best suggestions to make in relation to the best balances we need to achieve between economy, social justice and economy. I think of the changes that it made, and I lived through so much of it in a way. With the founding of the Nevin Institute, I recall when I was invited 50 years after I had first written for the Economic and Social Review to give the Geary lecture. But it is at the SRI meetings or at the NESC meetings, there is a correct recognition of how valuable the union perspective is in relation to the matters that are for discussion. And I think it also isn't just another person at the table. There is always something specific which we must never forget about the union position, both in terms of gender equality, both in terms of the inclusion issues. But it is coming from a position that is explicitly progressive in equality, in terms of equality in all of its aspects, in terms of seeking responsibility in the balances that I've suggested are now necessary between matters of economy, matters of ecology, and matters that have a global significance. And at this moment, the challenge facing trade unions, and which deserves all of our support as representatives of workers in every sector of our economy, is to give leadership in new circumstances, challenging circumstances, and play a central role in defining the Ireland of the coming, not just the Ireland, the European Union, the global structures that will prevail, that will affect all workers and people from all backgrounds. But the issue in the end of it is about the unions make a demand for conscious living, for not being, as I said, for being the target of life rather than being the arrow of life. The arrow of life in all its possibilities and fulfillment rather than being just the target. And in order to seize that opportunity, to build, I think, the recruitment that is necessary is crucial, that your engagement with the public is in fact presented and perceived as a proactive one, seeking opportunities, helping to foster an expansion in the new economic literacy that is needed and the rights-based thinking. And not only in your membership but among the public, because there is a suggestion occasionally in the Commons of matters economic that something can't be changed, that there is some mark of inevitability on it. Contrary, as I have said in speech after speech, all my last 3 decades I have said, there is sometimes a suggestion that matters are so complex with it that we now, in broadcast, people will say, we'll now turn to the experts and so forth. This experts, which is often based on a false, bogus expertise, are in fact actually more likely an abuse of authoritarianism. I believe that there is no concept that is not beyond the comprehension of our citizens, if it is explained effectively. And in asserting that, if I make that statement, the people who carry it forward are the trade unions, because they represent workers. They're at the forefront in building the progressive and emancipatory public education that is necessary to allow everyone across our society to advocate for their essential rights and to participate in the decision-making process. And that is the decision-making process about all aspects of society. And frankly, when I look at discussions on, for example, the filling of the major positions in relation to what was called our European Union, although I worry about the union aspect, as somebody who gave so many lectures about the Ventotene Accord and about a union that was built for peace and so forth. But when I think about the allocation of these most senior positions, to whom do we look for an assurance of a democratic European Union? A democratic European Union committed to peace, of a democratic European Union that will see that we should be addressing global issues that have been not addressed for many different reasons, issues of inclusion. That's the role where I think far beyond and through the European Union, through the meetings of the United Nations, what is taking place in the discussions in South America and taking place in Asia and Africa. This is something to which the Irish trade union voice is one of the most welcome voices in the world, and for good reasons, as people will say. To this end, therefore, I so welcome your campaign, Better in a Trade Union, a campaign run by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions this year, culminating in a large number of grassroots events in workplaces, communities, schools and colleges across the island over the inaugural Trade Union Week, which coincided with May Day. Initiatives like this are of such importance, aiming as they do to ensure that all working people are aware of the benefits of being part of a trade union, as well as of the wider benefits to society that flow from this, and the strength that being part of a collective, representing and negotiating as a group of workers rather than as individuals means for one's development and fulfillment. I particularly welcome the emphasis the campaign has taken on standing up for social justice on a human rights basis, including LGBTQ+ and women's rights, as well as campaigning on issues such as housing and healthcare. I think something is very, very much important. It is important to acknowledge that in order to achieve the change that is necessary in our society, that we must recognize there is a new form of economy required, one that must be sought, campaigned for, and one for which, for example, will combine economics, as I've said, with responsible ecology to achieve sustainability. But I just was thinking this morning about how often I have given these speeches, and I've come now to the conclusion that it is perhaps more important just at this moment to realize and call out those who oppose all I have been describing. It is important to realize, just think of those of you who went and supported different international gatherings for on environmental responsibility. The advocates, from your perspective, were outnumbered by hundreds to one and thousands to one by those who represented the very forces that have brought the destruction of our planet possible. And it will be like this. This is the one mistake I had been making in some of my speeches, and that is to recognize to recognise that consciously all of the time, the source of all of these problems is strengthening. They will be when the big jobs have been allocated in Europe. Far more unregistered lobbyists for big business present in Brussels than there will be for any of the people that we represent. We must realise that at the same time, going to the United Nations meeting, they'll be there on their thousands, representing the source of all our problems. So that is why one must say to the very top, at the very top, we require you to be transparent in your decisions. We just want lobbyists to be registered. We want to know to whom are we speaking with honesty across the table. All of that will be very, very important. Trade unions are our moral voice, reminding us, for example, on the pursuit of peace. How shocking it was to read from the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons that won the Nobel Prize on their day in 2017, that the combined spending on nuclear weapons grew by 10.7 billion to 91.4 billion in 2023 over the last 5 years. $387 billion has been spent on nuclear weapons during this time. How can I speak about poverty? And how can I speak of the devastation that is there after what has taken place in Gaza and elsewhere? And are we supposed to sit back and say, well, that's just a figure? We are on the point of returning to war. We are, in fact, looking at a time when the people who are making the greatest gains in relation to investment, as in fact are the people in the armaments production industry. It is, if I have to say, given my age at 83, where would you find hope there? I placed my hope in the organised workers and the trade union movement internationally, and I will continue to do so. And that is why it's so important. And isn't it great that you'll enjoy yourself today, but enjoy yourself every day for running campaigns like Better in a Trade Union. The world will be better when it's in trade unions. I think of the huelga that are taking place on the streets of Buenos Aires when they're opposing fascism, taking risks for the future, for democracy. That is what is taking place. And that is why the trade union movement has always had such a moral character, because it's a movement without borders. And the Irish trade union movement, despite many difficulties, was united in opposing sectarianism and in opposing racism, and it is still doing so today. Remember, I think, and sometimes we could be seduced into thinking, as people said, the modern Ireland that has evolved. It didn't evolve just like that. After the state was established, for example, in one of the most significant things, a decision had to be made about land in the 1923 Land Act. And in a brave statement, Tom Johnson and his colleague Buckley produced a minority report that suggested on how from the undistributed domain lands, 1.34 million lands, you could create jobs, you could feed the people locally, you could send food to the local markets. And it was the minority report. The majority report said, it's too late to stop the graziers. And thus agriculture labourers, opposed first by organised farmers, and then after that, they emigrated and they went to England and elsewhere. It was not an evolution. The unions refounded themselves, took on new circumstances, and built the union movement. And the wages and all the securities and rights that have been won all over the world, they were won on the basis of organisation and agitation and on good information. That is why, isn't it wonderful to know the good circumstance that a University College Dublin research work has suggested that 67% of all workers aged between 16 and 24 want access to collective bargaining and a union. And I will be among those who will welcome the transposition of the Adequate Minimum Wages European Directive, hard won by trade unionists in Ireland across Europe, which will require member states to initiate and promote policies and legislation that increase collective bargaining and coverage, and to facilitate the right to access collective bargaining, a right denied to too many workers in Ireland. These challenges are not new. This year marks the 100th anniversary, as I've told you, of that choice that was there between the proposal of Tom Johnson and Michael Duffy and the majority report in relation to land. I think the form of farming that they suggested could have fostered strong local communities, sustainable jobs, dependable local food supply, and it would include occupations for women and men. However, it is to the credit of the Irish trade unions, I think, that they have also, as I have said, it's nearly how many years? I remember travelling towards the end of the plebiscito in Chile and carrying funds from the Irish trade union movement to trade unionists in Chile. And the first people who asked me to travel to Colombia, I remember, where trade unionists were being murdered in their homes and in the workplace, was the Irish trade union movement. And the people who asked me to go to Chile originally for the families were the International Committee of the Congress of the Irish Trade Union Movement. And I remember being present for the funeral of Nelson Mandela in South Africa. And what everyone immediately said, isn't it great that the Dunnes Stores workers are with us for the funeral? And let us never ever forget them. I have been a member of a trade union since my first job, and I am proud that I was the founder of the teaching section of the Workers' Union of Ireland, which later is now part of SIPTU. And I remember when we were standing in front, and the interesting thing when it isn't always about wages, standing in front of what was then University College Galway Gate with a poster, Stalker Bunan Shaw. And it wasn't I've said about, think of what rights. It was about the right to construct the reading list for the courses that you were teaching, about the right to attend faculty, about the right to have a say in what we saw as our subject. And these rights are being denied right across the Western world at the present time, where you have a censorship of academics in the United States. And I recently spoke at Manchester University, where once again you had this timidity of saying that maybe in order to personally exist with your narrow range of interest, you had better say nothing. And that is why I was proud to found the teaching section of the Federated Workers' Union of Ireland, because it was about the right to be a free academic, and an academic that could take part in the public moral debates of the time. And I was proud so often to be able to go out those gates with others from Galway and march endlessly, sometimes winning, sometimes losing. And that's why I wrote the poem of Saturdays Made Holy in honour of Mary McPartland, a great feminist organiser, trade unionist and academic. The trade union tradition is a proud tradition. One thinks of how it has made its way into the hearts of those who are struggling for freedom in their different ways. Think of all the songs. And we are blessed today by someone who's worth his weight in gold in relation to the song tradition, John Kelly. I'm off to join the union. And many of those from the labour activist, Swedish-American Joe Hill, they realise the importance of culture, of time spent together, of music shared, of the songs in the rendering of which you could get such excellence, about the docks, about the mines and the factories. And I remember very well how proud I was of the Dockers Band in Galway City when I was studying there from 1969 and 1970. And from that rich trade union movement came the civil rights movement and the anti-apartheid movement and the equal rights movement. That's where you could always go. In the same ways the trade unions in turn could always turn to the artists to give a lead in what was important, celebrating universalism. I think the trade union movement is strongest when it is a movement that knows no borders, as I have said. And in Africa, for example, in some of the proposals that I've been involved in about discussing food security for Africa, in 40 countries there's a proposal that would allow multinationals and others who are now buying land. Africa is the focus of a land grab at the present time. And some of the proposals would turn smallholders, 11 million of them, into casual workers for factories that would be producing sometimes feed not for humans, but feed for animals. Therefore, I believe in many ways this is where the hope is. A unionized Africa, Latin America, where it is already enormously strong, and Asia. I repeat again, if you were composing an Irish foreign policy, would it be important to you to say, we'll be allowed in with our voice in the tail end of something that represents international capital? Or would you prefer to be where they say, the Irish voice is always welcome as it is in Africa, when countries of Europe who are not welcome in Africa because of the 19th century are. And of course we should move on from that. What Europe should do is acknowledge the 18th and 19th century and say to Africans, we have a new world, threatened by climate change, threatened by disaster, but we all have to move forward together. Europe refuses to do that. It keeps a kind of a half silence in it. There is no amnesia in Africa. There is no amnesia, I tell the people in the Iberian Peninsula. There's no amnesia in Latin America either. And there is a welcome for the experience of people who sought freedom and want to support it, as we did when we opposed apartheid and others. And that is why today is a splendid, splendid day. If there is to be a future of the United Nations, it will be from these new forces coming together and giving us a United Nations that's capable of coming together for peace, coming together for responsibility ecologically, forms of economy that will recognise all forms of difference and diversity. And the trade union movement will be at the front of it. And as you stand in... I want to finish by saying this. As you stand in solidarity which were sometimes described as the most vulnerable, the lowest paid and the least protected, you are in fact the best representatives and the best hope for a future. And I know when I speak to the Africans, they find that when they talk to Ireland, they understand about the importance of the debt legacy necklace that is around all Africans' necks, for example. And they turn and look to us for that is why we must speak and operate with authenticity in all of our policies. And there's something comforting in all of that. And today is your day for celebration, a day to enjoy yourself. And I want to say there are no more multifarious groups than I would ever like to see in these days at Oris and Uachtaráin. I want to thank you for coming. May I describe to you the singers and entertainers for today. John Walsh, the Carndona Brass Band, Winter Flack Hill Loch Orman, Shifra Niworain, Angus MacCowrick, the After Eights, Laura Nann, Brick Nasty, the Rat Singers. And I want to say, I said already, whether you're listening late at night or early in the morning or whenever, or do any form of music, or whether you have come back from the most remote corner, the most informed, wonderful, as I said, worth his weight in gold for his knowledge of music, is our MC John Kelly, and we're so fortunate to have him today. I want to thank the staff of Oris and Uachtaráin who make all of these garden parties possible. And they do so with one. Each and every one of you, I thank you for all the skills involved. And the OPW. And I want to thank also the St. John of God's volunteers, the Gardaí, everyone who helps us. Now I want to thank especially Philip Sweeney and the Arcana team, because I think they got left out once or twice in these early stages of the garden parties. And they are responsible for the first quality sound that you will hear in different rooms. So I say Cásúil na cuinig ra adabhsi. Míle buígas as autéis de flam. Bergax bannacht don tácaí. When Chana vas an Tránon ag maragút me, I gach gnéúr sil. Gwimragas bannacht ar don tácaí. Slán is bannacht.